They laughed when I refused to lend them money. Then the lawsuit came. The laugh came first, that sharp, dismissive laugh people use when they think they've already won. I remember it clearly because it told me everything I needed to know about how they saw me and how badly they underestimated what was coming next. It happened at a family dinner, nothing fancy, just one of those gatherings where money sits quietly under every conversation, even when no one says the word out loud. I had just poured myself a glass of water when my cousin leaned back in his chair and said, casually, "So, we need a favor." That's how it always starts. Not, "Can we talk?" Not, "Do you have time?" Just, "We need." I didn't answer right away. I'd learned that silence makes people reveal their real expectations faster than questions ever could. "It's an investment," he continued quickly, "short-term, practically risk-free." That phrase, practically risk-free, should be illegal. Across the table, his wife nodded enthusiastically. "You're good with money," she added. "You always have been." That was true. What they didn't say was the rest. You're single, you don't have kids, you can afford it. They didn't see my money as mine. They saw it as available. "How much?" I asked. My cousin named a number so large it briefly sucked the air out of the room. I kept my face neutral, but internally every alarm bell I had started screaming. I knew their financial history. The failed startup, the refinancing loop, the temporary loans that never quite came back. This wasn't an investment, it was a bailout, and they wanted me to fund it. I took a slow sip of water and said the simplest, calmest sentence I could. "No." That's when the laughter happened. Not loud, not angry, amused. My cousin smirked. "Come on, don't be dramatic. You're sitting on cash doing nothing." That sentence changed everything, because suddenly it wasn't about money anymore. It was about entitlement. I set the glass down carefully. "I'm not interested, and I'm not discussing it further." The table went quiet. His wife's smile tightened. My aunt looked uncomfortable. Someone cleared their throat. And then came the pivot, the tactic people use when they don't get what they want. "Wow," my cousin said. "I didn't realize you were like that." Like what? Responsible? Cautious? Unwilling to be exploited? I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my financial strategy, my risk tolerance, or my boundaries, because explanations invite arguments, and I wasn't negotiating. That night, I went home uneasy but not regretful. I trusted my instincts. What I didn't expect was retaliation. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Not a text, not a call, a legal notice. I read it 3 times before it fully registered. They were claiming I had verbally agreed to fund their business, that I had promised financial support, that they had made commitments based on my assurances. It was absurd. It was also dangerous, because lies, when written formally enough, scare people into compliance. I didn't panic. I did what I always do when money and power collide. I documented. I pulled emails, messages, calendar entries, bank records, any communication that showed exactly what I had and had not agreed to. There was nothing, because I had never agreed. I had never hinted. I had never promised a single dollar. And that's when I realized something chilling. They weren't confused. They were angry. Angry that I had said no. Angry that I hadn't played my assigned role. Angry that their plan depended on my money, and I had refused to hand it over. So they decided to force the issue. The lawsuit wasn't about winning, it was about pressure. If I folded, they got the money. If I fought, they hoped I'd settle just to make it go away. What they didn't know was that I had already structured my finances for exactly this situation. Separate accounts, clear paper trails, no verbal agreements, no undocumented transfers. My attorney didn't even blink when I showed her the notice. She said, "This is weak, but they're betting you'll be scared." I wasn't scared. I was focused, because when people try to weaponize money against you, the real battle isn't emotional, it's procedural, and I was about to show them exactly how expensive entitlement can be. If someone accused you of owing money today, could you prove you don't? Because saying no is easy. Defending it requires preparation. The first thing my lawyer told me was simple. Don't contact them, not even once. That was harder than it sounded.
Because when someone you've known your entire life suddenly accuses you of owing them money, every instinct screams to defend yourself, to explain, to clear the misunderstanding. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was strategy. The lawsuit arrived with impressive formatting, letterhead, legal language, and a demand amount large enough to make most people panic. They claimed I had verbally committed to funding their business expansion and then withdrew support at the last moment, causing them financial harm. In other words, they wanted me to pay for their bad decisions. What made it worse was how confident they sounded. They weren't asking, they were asserting. The filing included a timeline, dates, supposed conversations, even references to meetings that had never happened. Someone had spent time constructing this story. That told me everything. This wasn't emotional. It was calculated. My lawyer and I went line by line. For every claim they made, we asked one question. Where's the proof? There was none. No emails, no contracts, no messages, no bank transfers. Just statements. And statements don't move money in court. Still, lawsuits don't need to be strong to be stressful. They just need to exist. Filing fees are cheap compared to the pressure they create. What they were counting on was fear. Fear of legal costs, fear of family backlash, fear of reputation damage. They underestimated one thing. I had already insulated my finances from emotional leverage. Years earlier, I had made deliberate choices. I never discussed specific balances. I never hinted at future funding. I never mixed family and business finances. And most importantly, I kept everything documented. My attorney filed a formal response denying every claim. No emotion, no commentary, just facts. That's when they escalated. A week later, my cousin's lawyer sent a new packet of supporting evidence. When I opened it, I almost laughed. They had submitted screenshots of text messages that looked off. The formatting was wrong. The timestamps didn't align. The language didn't sound like me. One message claimed I wrote, "Don't worry, I'll cover the funding if the bank delays." I stared at it in disbelief. I would never write something like that. Not because I'm careful, because I'm precise. My lawyer smiled when she saw it. "This is bad for them," she said. "Fabricated evidence isn't just weak, it's dangerous." We immediately requested metadata and original device records, a standard legal move, and one that people attempting shortcuts almost never anticipate. They couldn't produce them because the messages didn't exist. Meanwhile, word began spreading through the family, quietly at first, then louder. I was being difficult, I was overreacting, I was hurting the family. Funny how none of that mattered when they wanted my money, but now that I refused, suddenly I was the villain. What they didn't realize was that every accusation only strengthened my position. Emotional narratives don't survive under financial scrutiny. Around this time, I took another step, one most people forget. I conducted a personal financial audit. Every asset, every liability, every account. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because clarity is power. If this case escalated, I wanted to be unshakable. And then we uncovered something unexpected. During discovery, their own financial records were requested. That's when cracks started showing. Unpaid vendor invoices, inflated projections, personal expenses charged to business accounts. They weren't just struggling, they were reckless. Their lawsuit wasn't a reaction to my refusal, it was a last resort. They needed money, and they thought intimidation would work. Instead, it exposed them. My attorney filed a motion questioning the credibility of their claims and the authenticity of their submitted evidence. She didn't accuse them outright. She didn't need to. She simply asked the court to require verification. That's when their tone changed. Suddenly, settlement offers appeared. Not apologies, offers. "Maybe we can resolve this quietly," their lawyer suggested. Quietly meant pay them something. I declined, because once you pay someone who lies, you teach them that lying works. The pressure didn't stop, though. I received calls from relatives, long messages about forgiveness and keeping peace. None of them asked if the claims were true. They asked if I could just make it go away. That's when I understood the real cost of financial independence. It isolates you from people who only valued you for access. but it also protects you, because I wasn't fighting to prove I was right. I was fighting to protect my financial autonomy, and the case was about to enter the phase they feared most: formal examination under oath. If someone tried to pressure you legally for money you never promised, would your financial records protect you or expose you? Stay with me. Now I'll tell you where their story starts collapsing under its own weight.
The deposition notice arrived on a Monday morning. 2 names were listed first: my cousin, her business partner. That's when reality finally hit them. Up until this point, everything had been paper threats and emotional pressure. Lawyers writing letters, family members calling to talk some sense into me, people assuming I'd fold to keep things quiet. But depositions are different. They're not conversations. They're traps for the unprepared. My lawyer explained it bluntly. This is where people destroy their own case by talking, and based on what we'd already seen, they were going to talk a lot. Before the deposition, my attorney and I spent an entire afternoon reviewing their financial disclosures, not just reading them, cross-referencing bank statements versus expense reports, invoices versus revenue claims, loan applications versus lawsuit narratives. The story they told the court didn't match the story they told the banks. That's a dangerous place to be. For example, in their lawsuit, they claimed my withdrawn funding caused their expansion to fail. But in a loan application dated 3 months earlier, they had already disclosed that funding was uncertain and expansion depended on future capital acquisition. Future, not promised, not secured, and definitely not me. Then there were the expenses. They claimed financial distress, yet their statements showed luxury purchases charged to the business account, designer furniture, high-end electronics, travel labeled as client meetings that coincidentally aligned with vacation photos on social media. That's not just bad optics, that's leverage. The day of the depositions, I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. My attorney handled it while I waited, pacing my living room, checking my phone every few minutes. Each hour felt longer than the last. When she finally called me, her voice was calm, almost amused. She said, "They contradicted themselves. More than once." Apparently, my cousin testified that I had verbally agreed to fund the business during a family dinner, but under questioning, she couldn't remember the date, or who else was present, or why no follow-up email ever existed. Then her partner took the stand. He claimed the agreement happened during a strategy meeting at my office. Problem? I didn't have an office at that time. We had already submitted documentation proving that. He froze. Silence during a deposition is never good. Then came the fabricated texts. When asked to provide the original phone used to send them, both parties suddenly upgraded devices and no longer had access. That excuse might work on a friend. It does not work under oath. By the end of the day, their own lawyer looked visibly uncomfortable. That's when I knew the case had shifted. A weak lawsuit can survive bluffing. It cannot survive sworn testimony. But the real turning point came a week later. My attorney requested an amended financial disclosure based on inconsistencies uncovered during deposition. The court approved it. What came back was explosive. Hidden liabilities. They had taken out a personal loan in my name as a potential guarantor without my consent, something the bank immediately flagged once contacted. It hadn't gone through, but the attempt alone raised red flags. That single act reframed everything. This wasn't about misunderstanding. This was about entitlement. They assumed access, assumed compliance, assumed my money was a shared resource, and when it wasn't, they tried to force it. My lawyer didn't hesitate. She filed a motion for sanctions, submitting falsified evidence, contradictory sworn statements, attempted financial misrepresentation. Those aren't mistakes, they're violations. Within days, their attorney reached out again. This time, the tone was different. No confidence, no demands, just urgency. We'd like to discuss resolution options. Resolution now meant survival. They were facing not just dismissal, but potential penalties.
And here's the thing people don't talk about. When you weaponize the legal system for money, you expose yourself to the same scrutiny you hoped to avoid. Every account gets opened, every transaction gets examined, every shortcut becomes visible. That scrutiny doesn't end when a case is dropped. It follows you. Licenses, creditworthiness, future lawsuits, everything becomes harder. Meanwhile, my life didn't implode the way they expected. I went to work. I slept better than I had in months. I stopped answering family group chats entirely because clarity brings peace. I knew the truth, and now the court did too. In the middle of all this, something surprising happened. Other relatives quietly reached out. Not to pressure me, to apologize. They had believed the narrative they were fed, that I was being selfish, withholding something I'd promised. Once the deposition transcripts circulated, that story fell apart. Silence replaced accusation, which told me everything. People don't get quiet when they're right, they get quiet when they're embarrassed. By the end of this situation, the lawsuit was no longer about whether I owed them money. It was about how much damage they had done themselves trying to take it.
The courtroom was quieter than I expected. No dramatic music, no raised voices, just the slow rustle of papers and the dull hum of the air system overhead. I sat beside my attorney, hands folded, spine straight. Not because I was confident, but because I refused to look small. Across the room, my cousin and her partner sat stiffly. Gone was the arrogance I'd seen at family gatherings. Gone were the smug smiles and whispered jokes. Now, they wouldn't even look at me. The judge entered, and the room rose. This was it. Not the end, but the moment where momentum becomes irreversible. The judge didn't start with speeches. She started with questions. Direct, precise, unforgiving. She asked about the verbal agreement. My cousin's lawyer attempted to explain that families often conduct business informally. The judge raised an eyebrow. And yet, she said, you provided written communications to banks, vendors, and partners, but not a single written acknowledgement from the defendant. Silence. Then the judge turned to the fabricated messages. She didn't accuse, she asked them to explain the metadata inconsistencies. Their lawyer spoke this time, carefully choosing words like miscommunication and technical oversight. The judge didn't buy it. Submitting altered or unverifiable evidence is not an oversight, she said. It's a risk. That word hung in the air. Risk. Because in court, risk means consequences. Then came the financial records. This was where everything collapsed. The judge walked through the numbers herself. Revenue projections versus actual income, expense classifications versus reality, loan disclosures versus sworn testimony. She noticed something we hadn't emphasized, a pattern. They weren't just careless, they were leveraged beyond reason. The expansion they claimed I had sabotaged had been financially unsound from the start. Even if I had invested, which I hadn't, the business would have struggled. The judge looked directly at them. Are you telling this court, she asked, that your entire business strategy depended on an undocumented promise? My cousin nodded. That was the mistake. The judge leaned back. That is not reliance, she said. That is assumption. And assumptions don't entitle you to someone else's money. At that moment, I felt something shift. Not triumph, relief. Because for the first time since this began, the narrative was no longer emotional. It was factual. Then the judge addressed the attempted loan application that listed me as a potential guarantor. That crossed a line. The courtroom temperature seemed to drop. You attempted to represent the defendant as a financial backer without authorization, the judge said slowly. Do you understand the seriousness of that? They both nodded. Barely. Their attorney requested a recess. The judge granted it. When we stepped into the hallway, their attorney approached mine. Not with demands, with concern. They wanted to settle immediately. Not quietly, just quickly. They offered to withdraw the lawsuit in exchange for no further action. My attorney didn't even look at me. She said no, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about precedent. If people can fabricate financial obligations and walk away consequence-free, they'll try again with someone else.
Back in the courtroom, the judge delivered her interim ruling. She dismissed several claims outright. She flagged the evidence submissions for review. And then she did something unexpected. She warned them. Continuing this litigation without substantive proof may expose you to sanctions and fee liability. In plain language, they could end up paying my legal bills. That was the moment they broke. I could see it. Their shoulders slumped. The entitlement drained from their faces. For the first time, they understood that trying to extract money from someone with discipline and documentation doesn't end in a payday, it ends in exposure. After the hearing, my phone exploded. Messages from relatives, missed calls, sudden concern. But none of them asked how I felt. They asked what would happen next. Here's the truth no one tells you. When you stop being financially useful to people, they call you selfish. When you prove you can't be exploited, they call you cold. And when the court agrees with you, they go silent. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because the case was over, but because the power imbalance was.
The final ruling came 3 weeks later. No courtroom this time, no speeches, just a written decision uploaded to the court portal on a quiet Thursday morning. I read it alone at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me. The judge dismissed the lawsuit in full. Every claim, every demand, every fabricated narrative. But that wasn't the part that made my hands shake. The judge went further. She ordered them to pay a substantial portion of my legal fees. Not all, but enough to hurt, enough to matter, enough to send a message. Their attempt to pressure me financially had backfired in the most ironic way possible. They ended up owing money they didn't have, and this time it wasn't optional. The ruling cited their inconsistent testimony, unverifiable evidence, and reckless financial representations. The phrase that stuck with me most was a single line buried halfway through the document. The court finds the defendants acted on assumption rather than agreement. Assumption, that word again, because assumptions are comfortable. They let people believe access is the same as entitlement. They let people convince themselves that someone else's success belongs to them. When the ruling became official, the fallout was immediate. Their business folded within months, not because of the lawsuit. It had already been failing. The lawsuit just exposed how fragile it really was. Credit dried up. Vendors demanded payment up front. Banks stopped returning calls. And once financial credibility is gone, it doesn't come back quickly. Family gatherings changed overnight. Some people stopped inviting me altogether. Others suddenly acted polite, overly polite, like distance wrapped in manners. A few tried to reconnect, pretending nothing had happened. I didn't confront them. I didn't explain. I didn't justify myself. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. People who only respect you when they can benefit from you were never on your side. And protecting your financial boundaries doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free. One message did surprise me. My cousin emailed me. No excuses, no accusations, just 2 sentences. She said she never expected things to go that far. She said she assumed I'd step in, like family does. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. Family doesn't fabricate evidence. Family doesn't file lawsuits to force money out of you. Family doesn't treat your discipline as betrayal. I never replied, and I don't regret it, because silence is sometimes the strongest boundary you can set. The biggest lesson wasn't about courtrooms or contracts. It was about preparation. I won because I never promised what I couldn't afford. I documented what mattered. I separated emotion from money. I understood that no is a complete sentence, and most importantly, I didn't panic. People lose financial battles not because they're wrong, but because they're rushed, emotional, and afraid of being disliked. I stopped being afraid of that a long time ago. Today, my finances are stronger than ever, not because I made more money, but because I stopped letting others feel entitled to it.
If this story resonates with you, ask yourself one final question. If someone tried to pressure you for money tomorrow, legally or emotionally, would your boundaries protect you? If the answer isn't a confident yes, then this story isn't just entertainment. It's a warning. If you want more real stories about money, power, and the consequences of entitlement, subscribe now and stay with us. Because the best revenge isn't just winning, it's never being vulnerable to exploitation again.